All right, so I told you guys you were going to be sick of me, and you probably already were sick of me, but Josh asked me to do a quick talk on data-driven storytelling, because often we have a day like this where we learn so much and we have so many new things that we want to think about, but as you've heard even from some of the management panels and some of the other speakers, if we can't communicate our information and our message effectively, then we've really failed. So, some of you have seen this quote before. Carolyn's here today. Carolyn, where are you? There she is. So this is a tweet of Carolyn's from a while back. The point of journalism is to craft a compelling story out of a factual circumstance. While facts aren't necessary, it's not why people read. If that was the case, we wouldn't have newspapers, we would just have printed PowerPoints. And so for our purposes, I would suggest that you could replace that with data-driven storytelling. The way I like to think about data-driven storytelling has to do with this. Who knows who this is? Wilson, that's right. So when I try and do a data-driven story, I use the Wilson principle. So if you remember the movie, Tom Hanks is stuck on an island. He has no human contact, so he turns a volleyball into his friend, right? He has conversations with the thing. They do all kinds of stuff. It's his buddy. So my point here is, give your data a voice. Don't just throw out the data, okay? So when we think about data-driven storytelling, the first thing we need to think about is the what. There are a million ideas probably racing through your head from a day like today. What you have to do is decide, what are you going to do when you take it back to whoever you're taking it to? Are you trying to talk about innovation, all right? Are you looking to educate? Do you want someone to understand something that already exists? Or are you looking to implement? Are you talking to a coaching staff? Are you talking to a team? You need to understand the goal of your message so that your communication is framed appropriately. And once you know the what, then you need to identify your focus. Those of us who've been to a bunch of these, writing a recap of these is almost impossible, because there's been 816 things that probably triggered your head. There's 10,000 other things you didn't understand that you're going to go look up later. And so there's so much to talk about. So the challenge with data-driven storytelling is to focus on one thing. Focus on one concept, particularly if you're talking about education, one thing, one aspect of a player's game or one aspect of a team's game, one state of play, much like Megan does with her special teams work. And most importantly, and this was mentioned earlier, to ensure that you can give credibility to what you're saying, acknowledge that there are other factors out there. You know, we talked about this with rush chances. We talked about this with some other examples. Highlight one thing, but acknowledge that there are other elements that can impact the bigger picture of hockey or whatever you're talking about, in addition to what you're trying to educate. So we've got the what, we've got the focus. Now what's important is the who. So whenever we're doing data-driven storytelling, it's important to acknowledge that there are two parties involved here. There's often three. There's the knowledge source, the person who has the information, who's innovated, who wants to communicate the message. That might be you. And then there's your audience. That could be, again, the public. For example, for me, I write for the public. There could be a coach who needs to communicate to players. It could be a general manager needing to communicate to his team. The goal is to get the message from one to the other. So the point is, if you are the data-driven storyteller, you sit between those two, and your job is to transfer the knowledge. That seems obvious, right? However, and some of you have seen this before because it's my very favorite thing in the whole wide world. This is how I think we often talk about analytics. The Corsi for this player was 2.63 over 60 minutes of time. The XGF was 0.28 for a chance when there were 3 forwards, 2D. You know, say that to someone and their head explodes, right? I don't walk into John Tortorella's press conference and say these kinds of things. Trust me, okay? So obviously we can see here, what we often do is we think we're communicating because we're using language that we understand, and our audience hears nothing because we're not talking to them in a way that they understand. Who watches The Good Place? If you didn't raise your hand, go home please, binge it. It's very easy, half-hour segments. This was a tweet that came out after the finale, and I think this is just a bigger, all-important message. thinking about the good place and how it's an object lesson that if you want to fix a broken system, you have to rely on the people directly impacted by the system for input and guidance. So if we go back to that previous idea of effective communication, we have to look at the audience both on the knowledge side and on the audience side to understand how they think about the situation, how they communicate about the situation, where it rates in their priority level. We have to center those people on each side of the equation to effectively communicate to them. We have to speak in their language, not ours. So specifically, like I said, speak your audience's language. There's all kinds of things, I'm sure many of you have seen these in your own work. Communication styles, Myers-Briggs, things like this. In hockey, again, like I said, I don't walk into the locker room and say, gosh, your shot assists are off the charts. I would rather say something like, you know, the pass that leads up to a shot, how valuable is that to you? Does that mean something on the ice? Who's really good at that? Is there someone here who's really good at that? Why are they good at that? Right? I write that differently, but I'm speaking to the player in their language. Respect their time. Josh shared a great insight with me. We were talking about this conference, and he was telling a story about when he started out, he would do all this work, and he would write volumes and volumes about a trade recommendation or a player evaluation and present it like a prize. Here is my work. Look at my work, right? Because you did all this work. But now that Josh is in the front office at one of the highest levels, he has people doing that to him, and he doesn't have time to read this much paper about 20 different ideas. And this goes back to the trust issue that was mentioned before. Respect people's time, know that they trust you, that's why they brought you in, that's why they're reading you, that's why they're talking to you, that's why they're listening to you, and present information in a way that respects the amount of time that they have to give you, not the amount of time that you put into something. They are rarely the same. Know what they value. I mentioned this before. What's going to connect with someone? What matters? It's interesting, I was talking with a player earlier this season who said, you know, I read this article on The Athletic, it wasn't mine, but I read this article on The Athletic, and it was really cool to see that they have found a way to measure defense. Okay, well, that was a window to me to start talking to that player about defensive play. Again, not in terms of metrics and measures and analytics, but to find insights into what that player is thinking about right now. Remember that your audience is super smart, right? They're going to point out the errant comma. They're going to see your lapse in logic if you didn't do your homework. But also your audience is super dumb. So you have to remember that too, which is again why we have to have focus. It's why we have to take the time to walk through one idea at a time. So all of this is to say, if we go back to this idea of communicating to a knowledge source and an audience, the who and the how are connected. Because how you communicate to each end of the equation could be different. How I communicate to the players is different than how I write. How I talk to John Tortorella is different than how I talk to my boss or my editor, right? Another important thing about the how, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, right? I wrote the article, why didn't they read it? I clearly said that in the article. Look at these commenters, they don't know. I mean, I've never said that, I've heard this. So the point is that, again, whatever communication context that you're in, it is incumbent upon you to work for your audience. What does that mean? Particularly if you're doing something new, don't be a black box. This player's good, period, end. What? You've got to give a little bit of explanation to show, particularly when we're talking about data-driven storytelling, in what context is this player good? What did you use? Why did you evaluate the player this way? Before you start to communicate, make sure you understand, back to Josh's example, there's hours and hours and hours worth of work that can go into understanding a model or a new statistic or a new measure or a new systems approach. Make sure you understand it so that then you can translate it. Back to that idea of using the different communication languages. You can't translate what you don't understand. And finally, slow down. Sometimes we figure something out and we're like, I want to tell this person everything about this thing. That can be information overload. Start with chunks. Start with chunks, build, slow down so that ultimately you're going fast in terms of building on that knowledge and accelerating understanding. I'm going to go over this next part quickly because Bill is going to come up next and talk about this a little more in depth, but use pictures. Also look at my pretty spaghetti graph that I built in R, and I'm so proud of it, so everyone has to see it. But pictures can communicate 1,000 words, and the point is to find the right one for the story you're going to tell. I needed to show each year of Sergei Bobrovsky's rolling save percentage. One graph wouldn't do it. I had to break it apart. I want to look at one player. Here's a good viz for that. I want to compare players. Notice I'm using different things every time. I want to look at a team and how each player on a team is performing, a different viz. And when you're using viz, ask yourself, does this make sense? Does it show what I'm thinking? Because there are so many tools out there now. Many of them are presenting the same information, but is it telling the story that you're trying to tell? Will other people understand what I'm trying to convey? And most importantly these times, how does it look online? So to that point, I'm going to pick on myself. Some do's and do nots. So the item on the right was one of my first pieces for The Athletic. I was very proud of it. Very, very proud. And then I realized, first of all, that table is way too small. Second of all, I used a color that's not friendly to those who are colorblind. And I mean, really, I didn't even use a good font. So don't do that. I realized that what you should do is flip the table so that it's narrow, not wide, and you should use different colors. All right, so think about how you're presenting. This is another fun one, and I'm showing it to you because I can't put it in public because it doesn't work, but I learned how to make a lollipop graph in R, but I couldn't figure out how to order it. Although, Katerina, I think you did, and if you did, you have to show me how, because I was up till 2 in the morning trying to make it work, and I couldn't make it work. So this is for an article that Shayna Goldman and I just published at the end of this week about looking at each team's value in terms of their current lineup, and we wanted to show the variance from preseason to this. And I was so proud of this lollipop graph. I was so proud of it. I'm like, I can't make it work. I can't make it work. And we realized we had to move to Tableau. And it got to the point where we finally realized that the Tableau version, while quote unquote easier for us and not as fun and exciting and cool, was the better way for us. And then this morning, I tweeted this, a brilliant quote from our Rangers friend. And within minutes, I received a screen cap from my co-author, Shayna. And then I also decided this. This is the conversation we had when we were trying to decide which viz to use. So, lesson learned. And of course, use video. I think this is going to make this run. Yep. This is from a game earlier this week here at Nationwide Arena. Just like a picture can tell 1,000 words, so can a video, and hopefully you've seen that today. It's a great way to teach your audience how to connect an idea to what they're actually seeing. So as far as your process when it comes to data-driven storytelling, again, always research first so that you understand the concept that you want to talk about, and then write. Another Carolyn quote. Carolyn's one of the best. Often we place the importance of the narrative above the importance of the facts. You can't write a good story if it's fake, okay? At least, sort of. Yes, anyway, and I would propose to you all a new rule, and this is, but this is not the rule. This is not the rule. This is the rule. And this is why. And this is in the context of writing, but I would propose this to you if you're communicating for your job in any sense. Go back and get feedback when you present something, when you communicate something. Because this is how we know if we're communicating effectively. Minus the trolls, this is how we know. What that means we have to do, when someone comments, one of my mentors told me many years ago, there was always a grain of truth in everything someone says. Find the truth. What is the critique that's valuable in what they said? What resonates? What do people go, this was great, I loved it when you did this, I loved it when you did this, I loved it when you did this. That's your audience telling you how they like to be communicated to. Similarly, what was misinterpreted? I can't believe you did this. You said this. That's not at all what's true. Okay, but that's not what I said. In the intro, I said, I may have said it in the intro, but I didn't say it well enough for my audience to receive it. Remember communication styles. And very, very important, vent privately, explain publicly. So some final tips for you. Make friends with people smarter than you. That's why I hang out with everyone in this room, because you're all smarter than me. Use the very best tools that you can. Find the models that have been proven and are working. Find the data that works. Find the data that's been proven. And particularly in data-driven storytelling, double, triple, quadruple check your work. Particularly when we're looking at the analytics space where people are going to be critical. If you make a mistake, it invalidates everything that you just wrote. Oh, see, they don't even understand this thing. So what does this whole article say? This article says nothing. So make sure that your work is on point and your data is correct. And cite, 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 cite. Build on the people who have done the work, elevate them, celebrate them, and allow others to find the information themselves so they can do that as well. These are some wonderful people that I'd like to thank. I'd like to thank all of you, and that's it.